but
Yeah, I mean, and the professor especially, it's about student-professor relationships. And what I was still teaching, I was a professor at a small liberal arts college while I was writing both The Resemblance and The Professor. So at least the first drafts of both books, and where The Resemblance looks at Greek life and hazing on college campuses, the professor really dives into student-teacher relationships, the growing mental health crises on college campuses. And I was writing pre-COVID, and I think it's only increased exponentially. So during and post-COVID, but not just mental health with the students, but with the faculty too, and faculty burnout, and of course the politics of teaching, not just with the students, but between faculty members with their egos, and between administrations that maybe don't align with faculty interest or what the faculty want. So it was a heady time to be writing, and I think continues to be so if you're in that world.
yes, where the stakes are, well, years ago when I taught at ASU, Arizona State University, for 3 years, crime fiction, I remember I said this before, that one of the selections I did was Tony Hillerman's Edgar winner. And none of the students could believe that anyone would kill for faculty advancement, for basically tenure, and called The Thief of Time. And they all discounted that as, like the stakes are just way too low here for murder.
Yeah.
But in point of fact, if you are living in that world, that is the high stakes.
Right. Yeah, getting that tenure track position. And now, more so than ever, those positions are really disappearing. And so you have faculty members and grad students who've spent all this time in school. They've been trained to do one thing with their eye on that one job. Mm-hmm. And if you have 400 applicants for one position who are all well qualified, well published, have impressive teaching records, what wouldn't you do for that job? And I think professor also looks into just the identity. It becomes your identity. And that was something that as I was kind of tiptoeing out or thinking about tiptoeing out, I was reflecting a lot on, and even if you look at my bio, it says former professor turned novelist. There's this part of me that it still identifies that way, that has a hard time letting go with that way I've seen myself. And I think that's true for a lot of faculty.
Right. Well, I remember at the crossroads of a decision years and years ago about what I wanted to do. And since I am, so much older than you, I thought about law, and I was told that I would wind up in, family law or childcare, child law, not childcare, which I didn't care about. And if I wanted to teach, that would be, I don't know, I just couldn't really get into it. So I did other stuff. Then I wound up being a librarian, and now here I am, a bookseller. But I've been grateful for a long time that I did not choose academic life, because it really would not have suited my temperament. And I can see why it would be very difficult for a lot of people the more corporate version of universities as we now have them. And, the politics of it are just so. I mean, the Wall Street Journal every day, which is the one that usually covers the politics of universities. Every day I read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Arizona Republic, hoping to get, kind of a spectrum. But, there seems to be this whole fervor at the moment for protesting and, sort of an untamed left going out there. I find it really intriguing. We've had several things here at ASU, protests about faculty either speaking out or not speaking out, or groups hosting or not hosting. And it's like anything you do creates a reaction in a sort of social media mob, kind of a thing, which I think has to really keep the campus roiled. But you know what? I just don't remember lots of students sleeping with faculty and vice versa. So maybe we just kept it quiet in the 1950s and nobody noticed. Maybe it was always going on.
Yeah, and I think we didn't talk about things, but here in The Professor, it's not even necessary. We don't know, right, if there was an affair, but because of social media, the accusation goes viral and people believe this professor has had this affair with the student before there's any proof or even the investigation is completed, the Title IX investigation. So you also have that aspect of social media where people make decisions about something that they're very, little informed about. And then there are real consequences, real life consequences for the people involved.
I think so too. I didn't complete the introduction for Lauren, so I will go back and say she was a former professor turned novelist and the award-winning author of the thrillers The Professor and The Resemblance. Have you already won an award for The Professor?
No, just the resemblance.
Kind of anticipating, right?
Uh-huh.
I love it. Her books have been Amazon editor picks and covered everywhere from the New York Times to E! And Paste magazine. And I already mentioned that she won the Thriller Award for Best Novel, but she also was named a book all Georgians should read. We have something called One Book Arizona. Is that more or less what we're talking about?
Yeah, this is with the Georgia Center for the Book. And so they always choose 10 adult titles and 10 nonfiction titles each year for all. And since I'm from Georgia and the book is set in Georgia, that all Georgians should read.
Got it. Lauren holds a PhD in German literature from the University of California, Davis. So, when I was at Stanford, I can hardly even remember the University of California, Davis. It was very much embedded in wine culture, wasn't it? And, agricultural stuff.
Yeah, well, it started as Berkeley's agricultural extension, and then now it's known for its viticulture program because it's, of course, so close to Napa and Sonoma and all those wine regions.
Right, and you have what, a master's degree from the University of Georgia? What's that in?
That's also German.
German. What interested you in German as an academic subject? I mean, I studied German and I found it a challenging and fascinating language.
I was drawn to the literature. So I studied 19th century literature was my specialty, but when I was younger, we moved to Germany. So when I was 12, we moved there and that piqued my interest. And then I studied comparative literature and German in college. My first job was an internship with Porsche, so a German company. Oh. I quickly realized I did not like working at it. It was NPR, which I enjoyed, but I did not like the desk job. This was also pre-Me Too, and I didn't like the politics of working at a car company. So I went back and surprise, surprise, also specialized in feminist studies. But I really wanted to do comparative literature. But in order to study comparative literature, you have to have a good comprehension of 4 to 5 foreign languages. And I had German and a working, very, very rudimentary knowledge of French. So German lit was the way I went.
So I spent an entire quarter with a wonderful professor whose name I cannot recall, but he was an award-winning professor, and all we read is Goethe's as Faust. And it was fabulous to dive into a work over, all those weeks. And, I've read Werther, seen the opera, the whole bit, and other works by Goethe and so forth. But Faust really is an incredible achievement and, well worth loads of study. So is that the kind of thing that you were reading?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote about Werther in my dissertation. I wrote about Goethe a good bit just because I was doing 19th century UK. Right. I focused on female authors, but he had friendships and writerly relationships with some prominent female authors of his time, like Sophie von La Roche. And he's the Shakespeare of German literature. So I think if you study German literature, have to read him. And did you read Faust 1 and 2 or just Faust 1?
1 and 2.
Yeah. And the second one is such a sprawling epic that you need to understand, mythology and everything else. But I think it's incredible to have as someone who did study comparative literature, and we would be asked to read so many pages in such a short time, to have a semester we did that once with War and Peace. We read War and Peace over an entire semester. And I think that course is what made me change from I wanted to study international business, and I changed to comparative literature because of that course.
Well, here you are, well prepared to write about dark academic.
Yeah.
I went through all this because I think dark academic is every genre now gets a label. But I think, most people refer back to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. But in point of fact, you could, like refer back to Gaudy Night by Dorothy Sayers. Or there's something, the basic Agatha Christie setup where you have a closed environment, whether it's a country house or something, it also works for a college campus or, on Oxford University College or something, so that if you have a crime, it is encircled. And therefore, you don't have just like some random guy off the street who, well, you could have, but generally the idea is that you have a limited number of suspects and you have some kind of an investigator, and there's a containment that allows it to proceed, usually in a linear fashion. And that's so different, from all the psychological twisty novels, which can go in all directions and all kinds of time. So what makes this comfortable for you? What makes this particular sort of story structure so comfortable for you?
Well, I mean, it's very much a write what you know experience, because at least the setting was one that I knew well, and the professor, especially, those relationships I knew well. I knew what that career path looked like, so that more of my research went to the police procedural aspect. So I had to research, a day in the life of a homicide detective and things like that. But I also think for me, because I love reading that kind of fiction too, I love dark academia, and a lot of those titles are set in these Northeastern small liberal arts institutions. And so for me, setting it at this big Southern research university, what happens in the resemblance, I don't think could happen at a small liberal arts college. Like the mystery itself wouldn't play out the same way it, does happen at a bigger university. So just taking that genre that I really liked, but investigating what it would look like set in the South, set at a big school where you don't know everyone. It is still closed, but it allows for a slightly bigger network. And the first one is set at a place where Greek life is prominent. Having these class sizes that are huge, so your professors might not know you as well as you. At the liberal arts college I taught at, while I was writing this, there's no way I think what happens in the resemblance could have happened there. Or at least they would have
I certainly see your point.
here.
Yeah. Now, I think you're absolutely right. I look around me sometimes here and recognize Arizona State now has like 4 campuses, over 100,000 students. There's no real containment. I mean, you could compress it into like the Barrett, school or whatever it is, where they're individual colleges, but that's really, the Oxford and Cambridge structure. The university is vast, and then within it there are smaller colleges. But yeah, so Athens, Georgia, have you had any blowback from Athens, Georgia about setting your books there?
No, and I wondered even from the university, because it's a fictionalized version of the university, of course, but because I do use real building names, and the bookstore, actually the UGA bookstore, asked me at the beginning of the year to come give a talk, so I was able to do that in front of all the red and black sweatshirts, and I had actually some former professors of mine who were there in the audience, which was really cool for me. And then a lot of people who went to school or are there now, I think really enjoy it. Is so firmly set in Athens, and I wasn't living there at the time. I lived there for 6 years. I wasn't living there when I wrote the books, but I would go back. My late husband's family lived there, so whenever we would go visit, I would go and I'd walk the paths that I had Marlette walking, and so it has all my favorite Athens places. My favorite coffee shop is Marlette's favorite coffee shop. Some of my favorite restaurants are there. So it's firmly rooted there, and I think for people who are either looking for that nostalgia or they can just visualize it in their head. So far, it's been a positive response of, I know where that is, and that's exciting to read and see in a book.
Well, that's great. After all, people said books in Paris and, of all kinds of cities with obvious real landmarks and so forth. So why not? So talk to me about Marlette, because here she is again.
Yeah, so she, of course, in the first book, she is the daughter of a professor. This is why she's first on the scene when there's a fatal run on the university campus. She's a homicide detective who is very dogged in her pursuit of justice, and she does some things that, and this is kind of a spoiler, but the book's been out for a year, and you know it as soon as you pick up The Professor, but she ends up retiring at the end of the first book. So in the second book, we pick up and she's now a retired homicide detective. And she is the type of person that really identifies with her job. So she's kind of lost her purpose. She's also lost really her best friend, who was her partner Teddy in the first book, because of some things that she's done to make that relationship a little more estranged, and he realizes he needs to set some boundaries with her. So when a student dies near campus under suspicious circumstances, his professor is implicated in having an affair that may have led to his death. Her mother, who is a colleague of the accused professor, asks her to get involved. But Marlette, she no longer has the same resources that she did when she was on the force. So she has the same skills, same determination, not the same resources. So she really has to get creative in discovering the truth. But at the same time, she's also unbound from the rules of the police force, which she always treaded, lightly around those lines anyways, but it allows her to do things. And it kind of is like a highly skilled home sleuth, because she has all the skills, but she no longer can access, crime scene footage or DNA reports or anything like that. So it was a challenging but interesting place to write her from.
Well, that's what Michael Connelly has had to do with Harry Bosch, as he has aged out of the LAPD. And as you point out, detectives have to really follow a procedure, or otherwise the evidence and so forth they collect can be tainted and thrown out in court or cause a mistrial or whatever it is. So even if they would like to take shortcuts or they think they know what's going on, they still have to, get warrants to burst into houses and all the rest of it. So it is a lot more free if she is, in fact, no longer in the police. Was that part of your reason, or was it just a natural progression from the events and the resemblance that she did need to retire?
It's more, I felt a little bit like she needed to be punished at the end of the resemblance for some of her. Right. She does get to the bottom of things, but she hurt some people in the process. So part of it was a bit of punishing her for doing the things that, of course, I made her do. And so then when I started, it's like, well, here she is, because she does resign at the end of the resemblance. So what can she do now?
Well, true, but she's still in Athens. So now that you've retired her and you have also relocated to another place, do you have some idea of moving her? Are you going to continue to write her, or do you feel like you've told her story and you may be looking for something else?
We'll see. Right now, I'm working on something a little bit different that is set in Nashville, which I'm very excited about, because it's the first time I've actually been living in a place that I am writing. And it's with a female PI who only takes on female clients. She loves Dolly Parton. She loves her little red sports car. Where Marlette is always staring down, suspects. She just wants to give everyone hugs and cookies. So she's a very different kind of character. And it's a really fun switch to write from. So that's what I'm working on right now.
So for those of you watching it, the International Crime Festival called VoucherCon is actually going to convene in Nashville right before Labor Day next summer. And there are quite a few crime writers who now live there. J.T. Ellison lives there. Brad Thor lives there. Now we know that Lauren lives there. I could probably come up with a beer list. And there's a lot happening in Nashville. I mean, when I was earning my master's in library science, I spent some time at Vanderbilt, and it's a very, very different city now. Part of that driven, by the music industry, because it has attracted, money and celebrities. I mean, it used to be if you went to Nashville, you basically went to see Andrew Jackson House, And, that was kind of it. Or maybe Grand Ole Opry, but that's really changed. It's become a major city with an interesting culture, local, but also more national. Are you enjoying that aspect of living there?
Oh, I'm loving it. And one reason, so there's a big creative community, but there's a good writer community, like you
Mhm.
said, a really supportive network of writers. There's a place called The Porch, and they do a lot of workshops and bringing people together, which is really lovely. There's great bookstores. I did an event at the bookshop last night. There's also Parnassus Books, which is Hatchett's bookstore. And it's really lovely. And then yes, it's growing, but it still has this small town niceness that is just so lovely, where people just still chat with each other. And it's not like a big city where everyone's, looking down and doesn't engage. And that was something I was really looking for when I moved. And I've really enjoyed finding that just niceness and community here.
I found that in Canada. We were recently in Canada, and I could not believe how nice everybody was. Everyone was glad to see you. The servers were glad to wait on you. The shopkeepers were thrilled to have you. The, drivers, if you put a toe in the street, all screeched to a halt. So, they actually held a train for us when we had a connection between Montreal and Quebec, and there'd been a medical incident on the train from Toronto to Montreal. And we thought we're toast, because we're going to miss the train. And then whatever, they held the train. And then they, took everybody's luggage and carried it across the platform, put us all on. And I thought that is never happening at Penn Station or whatever. So you're right. Niceness is a great call. The other thing about Nashville, I've always found interesting, it's in the middle of Tennessee, which is horizontally much bigger than it is vertically. So you have Memphis on one end on the river, which is often sort of like suburban Mississippi, a very, very different culture. And on the other end, you have Knoxville, which is part of Appalachia, and Oak Ridge, which is, a science thing. And Nashville is kind of like this pivot in the middle of these two extremely different cultures, but all in one state.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a beautiful state too. You, like you said, you have the mountains and you have the sprawling countryside, and then here there's a river, and you have the Batman building, which I still get excited to see. It's a just cool skyline.
Indeed. Well, TVA really made a big difference to Tennessee, which used to be flooded and so forth. It was one of Roosevelt's great projects in the 1930s, and I think transformed Tennessee. And now I've noticed there, because Americans have decided to sail their own rivers rather than necessarily going to the Seine or, the Amazon. And now there are regular river trips that will leave Memphis and St. Louis and wander up through the Tennessee rivers and so forth. But the flooding, which you wouldn't know about, but used to be terrible, has now been taken under control. But I digress, as I always do. So what you say that Marlette has never investigated love affairs, but how does she go about then, in this, it's a lot of innuendo and all. It's not so much evidentiary. How does she go about investigating?
Right, because to a certain extent, there's this implication that something happened. So she is put in the position of proving something didn't happen.
Right. Proving a negative is so hard.
It's very, very difficult, especially when one person in the relationship has died. And then because of this death, other people feel compelled to keep his secrets. So she really has to get very, very close to his life. And if you read it, you will see what I mean. She gets as close as possible as she can to his life and his experience in order to discover the truth of what happened. Then not only how he, if he had an affair, if there was an affair, but also how he died, because of course, with her homicide training, that's also what she wants to get to the bottom of.
So the victim, Ethan, or the dead person, Ethan, sorry, is presented originally as a suicide, or that's sort of the assumption that people have. So not only, part of this is to decide, of course, if you're reading a crime novel, the odds that somebody is actually a suicide are very weak. It's it's a known way to start off a story is that, you have to disprove this easy verdict of no, it was suicide. And then again, because of the affair and other stuff. So there's actually more than one negative to be proved in this thing.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And, part of that too is that suicides, there's a certain amount of what we want to call it, reputation restoration or something that needs to happen. It may be marginally more acceptable for grieving friends and family that somebody was murdered than that they actually took their own life, because suicide always puts a certain amount of guilt on the survivors, or at least a question of what could we have done to prevent it.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I think part of what the novel addresses too, because it's talking about the mental health crises of young people, is that part of the reason it's initially assumed that it's suicide is because it's becoming so prevalent with young people. And so that's something that the novel talks about as well. Why is there this immediate assumption?
So do you feel like this is a darker story than The Resemblance?
They're both dark. I mean, because
yeah, they are. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's a more intimate story than The Resemblance. It gets a lot closer into, well, they both have to deal with the psychology, but to me, it feels almost more claustrophobic than The Resemblance. Feels a little bit wider because you're looking at Greek life and those institutions and what's going on with groupthink and just the bad behavior of students unleashed. And this one is getting a lot closer to what people do to each other and in more intimate relationships, and not just romantic intimate, but friendships and the professor-student relationship as well.
So is your third book that we've been discussing, is this going to be a lighter? I mean, I can see you smile when you talk about it. So are you having more fun with it? I mean, because, books like this, I think, are hard to write emotionally because, they are dark. So it means you're spending time in a dark space quite a lot while you're creating it.
Yeah, it is still a murder mystery. So there will still be dark elements, of course, because you're talking about this huge break in the social code and the, potential loss of life. But it is, because of the protagonist, I think, being a little bit more lighthearted, because it's a female PI with
Right.
loves Dolly Parton, and just even Dolly herself, I think, makes it feel a little bit more lighthearted. So it feels more cheerful in a lot of ways than these two. And I think there are moments of levity in The Professor and The Resemblance, just because Marlitt has a dark, but a darkly humorous way of viewing the world. And so that adds some levity, and some of the, conversations that she has add some levity. But you're right. I think when I think of The Resemblance and The Professor, I think of them in like dark gray, black, green tones. And this, I think, this new one is more bright pink and rhinestones, which probably has a lot to do with Dolly.
It really does. I was watching her briefly as I went by. What was it? She was just in some, was it a game? I mean, a football game?
In the football game, the Tennessee, Georgia.
Dallas or whatever?
I think, well, maybe this was more recent, but for the Tennessee, Georgia game, she sang the national anthem.
Right, maybe that was it. Once upon a time, Dollywood and all, if you lived in Knoxville and you went up into the mountains through Pigeon Forge and so forth, Dolly had a very large impact there for a very small person. She has an enormously powerful personality. But I remember I think actually when I lived there, she was building Dollywood. I mean, it wasn't Dollywood from the beginning of her career. It was Dollywood as she kind of moved along. And now she's become, a cultural institution. And it's not, I don't know, do you think that there's the country music vibe still as big in Nashville as it was, or we moved on to other kinds of music?
I think it has everything, but country music, if you go down Broadway, which is that strip that has all those bars and restaurants where they just play live music every night, all night long, and you can just go from venue to venue and hear different musicians, it's still predominantly country, but you'll hear rock and pop and all kinds of other stuff, especially once you get outside Broadway into the other neighborhoods. There's a little bit of everything and a little bit for everyone, which I think is really lovely.
So why did you settle on Nashville? I mean, there's nothing to, well, it will have something to do with the next book when we talk about it. It doesn't have anything to do with this one, but did you shop cities, so to speak, before you decided to move?
I came up to Nashville a lot and I would rent these long-term Airbnbs and I kept wanting to extend my stay. And so that was one sign to me that I should be here. And I met people before I moved who are now my friends who I see. In fact, I did an event Tuesday night at the bookshop, and there were two people there who I had met at the bookshop over a year ago at a book club they did when I was thinking about moving to Nashville. And we've become friends. I now do my own book club, and then they were there supporting me on Tuesday. And so I think there's just something about that community, that supportive nature that was a big draw for me.
Excellent. Well, you've clearly abandoned the rigors of academic life for the uncertainties of the writer's life, but you're doing very well with it. Do you feel like, you had to have a lot of life experience before you really began to write?
Well, I feel like because I wrote about the professor world, I definitely, even though I've left academia, that still has led me to write these two books. But I also had, some personal losses after I got the book deal that now I think affect the way I write and what I think about when I'm writing. That I was writing about death, and I wrote things that still feel true to me, but I am very cognizant of I didn't quite understand what I was writing, or I understand it in a different way now that I've had those life experiences. So if I had written something in my 20s, I'm sure it would be very different than what I wrote in my 30s, and then what I'll write now that I've, experienced that loss.
Well, having to reboot your own life, I think probably makes it easier for you to engage in characters who are doing the same thing. It's a hard-earned experience, and I'm sorry that you had to go through it. I wasn't, thinking about that so much as just, what can you say in your early 20s in a whole novel that would mean very much? I don't know. I mean, I've known a few authors who have been very successful very young, but I find that people, especially people who've had difficult lives, often are the best writers because they have so much material to draw on.
I read once, and I'm not going to remember the poet's name, but she talks about grief being a window that opens and allows you to connect to other people. And I think that's true. And I think, unfortunately, the longer you live, the more experiences that you'll have that way. And the more you do kind of open these windows for connection that might not have existed before. I think there is something to be said for capturing. I don't know if now I could wholly capture what it was like to be in my 20s and feel invincible and like I could bend the world to my will, because I think I did believe that in my 20s. So maybe there's something to be said to writing from that perspective and capturing that. But I draw a lot from personal experience when I write. And so I think even though it's not autofiction, it is still fiction. I definitely needed to have those experiences and even time to reflect on those experiences in order to write about them.
It'd be interesting to see if you go back to Marlette. It may be that you said whatever you wanted to say about her, but sometimes characters, can gain a new life. Or a story will arise that really suits that character. But I think it's great that you're trying something different, to kind of stretch your wings and see what that will be. There are writers who do. I mean, it's intriguing that some writers are more comfortable with staying with the same cast and exploring all of the nuance and all of the, ups and downs and so forth of those characters. Whereas others really like world building and want to, every book. I mean, it's particularly true in science fiction, although once you get a series, you're not doing it. But I don't know. I'm not a writer. I'm a reader, and I both like series, and you get attached to them. But I also like standalones because there's more suspense in them, since everyone in it is in jeopardy. There's no safety net, particularly for generally there's no safety net in the standalone. And then I like books like, Gone with the Wind. I've always thought had the perfect ending. She went back to Tara, and that was it. We didn't have to know what she did after that. So there was going to be all this life in front of her that she was going to live, and that we were not going to follow. But we did stay with her during, the period that the author wrote about. Same thing is true with Rebecca. The house burned down. There they both are. The house was actually the main character anyway. So once the house is gone, it's like all over. But you don't really need to know what Max and Mrs. De Winter do. Our time with them is over with, but yet they didn't die.
Right.
And I really like that. And you can't do that with a series, because if you do, the series ends, right?
Yeah, there is something nice about the open-ended nature of certain novels that just you can imagine whatever fate you want for them.
Yeah, you can keep writing it, in your head. And if you don't like what happened, you can, kind of create like a new ending for them. So the other thing I think is interesting, and I should ask you this because everybody wants to know it, has there been any interest in television or film for your books?
Nothing official. So nothing that is nothing official. That's all I can say. There has been some interest, but nothing that is moving forward as of right now. But I think Marlitt would make an excellent TV detective. I don't know if you saw Mayor of Easttown with
I saw some of it. I didn't see all of it. Yeah.
I thought that was incredible. And it really has that dark sense of place. And then she plays that great troubled detective so well. And what I love about series is you really get to know those, and instead of a movie, right, you really get to know the character and the world. And so that's what I envision for her, but we'll see what happens.
I agree with you. I think streaming has been an absolute gift, for what's been a gift for authors and readers. The other thing is, and we've talked about this quite a lot lately, because now that the writers and actors strike is over and stuff is, starting up again, one of the questions people always ask at events for the authors, like, who would you cast? Like, you would have anything to do with that, because mostly you would not. But it's important to remember that even if you get some kind of a streaming or movie deal and it isn't great, that doesn't affect the books. I mean, it's great for authors, and it's always good for sales to have some sort of a visual thing, but the really big kick will come if it's a successful adaptation or translation to screen or whatever it is. But it doesn't mean that the books are bad. If the adaptation is bad, the books are still the same. And I don't think that authors lose readers if they have bad TV or movies. But if you have good, you can really gain a whole lot. So, it's a tough thing for authors, I think, to watch something that they don't particularly like. But at the same time, it's not going to affect the books. I think the harder part is to keep the actors out of your head when you're writing.
Yeah, I don't know how it would be. I know Karen Slaughter is working on some more of the Will Trent story. And now that it's a TV show, I don't know how you don't think of that actor, think of that cast when you're writing. But maybe you've lived with them so long in your own head, that's more powerful, than anything that you see on the screen. Or maybe you don't watch it. I don't know what the trick is. I know James Patterson said, take the money and run when it came to film and TV deals, because you just, once you sell your rights, it's their project. So
yeah, Elmer Leonard used to advise people of that too. He had lots of movies because he was such a dialogue driven author that they were almost like scripts. rather than novels. I've also heard authors say that they don't listen to their own audiobooks because they don't want the narrator's voice in their head. So what about audiobooks for you? Do you have them, and do you like the narrator? Or do you even listen to it?
So when they were choosing the voice actor for the resemblance, who it's the same one, so same audiobook narrator for the professor, they sent, I think 5 or so auditions, and I really loved Saskia Malvergard. I think I might be mispronouncing her last name, but she does an incredible job. It's not how I hear Marlette's voice, just because that would be some weird version of my own voice, but she does capture her voice, and she really does an incredible job capturing the voice of the other characters too, which I think is sometimes difficult when you're, doing Teddy's voice, and the professor, she also has to speak some German because the professor is a German professor. So there's some German words she has to say, and she did a really good job at that too.
So you have listened to it. Does it echo in your mind then? You're not writing Marlette right now, so I guess
Yeah, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, I think, because of what you said. I don't want to think, even it's not even, it's the voice, but it's also the intonation. It might be slightly different than how I hear the stops and starts in my head. So I've listened to parts, but not the whole thing of any of them.
So another question: have you had much in the way of mail as an MAIL, from other, academics? Have you had any sort of feedback one way or another from people who are in academia?
So I still have colleagues who teach, and they're reading it right now. And I have asked for, real time comments, because I'm very curious. I think they will understand a lot of what is in there in just a different way than if you haven't taught, you would understand, especially teaching on a college campus. But I've had a lot of high school, even middle school teachers feel, I think, very seen by some of the interactions in the book that they can relate to. And so that has all been positive. So far, I think people who are in that world have enjoyed seeing parts of it represented on the page. So we'll see if that continues.
Right. Well, I think you said that well, and they feel seen. I was thinking you may have given them a voice, but sort of the same thing. What about students? Have any students reacted either to the Greek aspects, or they're sitting in class and thinking, I've got the professor.
I've heard more from parents, especially after the resemblance came out. I heard parents talking about, oh, my student's going to, this school, they're thinking about rushing, or they're thinking about joining a fraternity, and, expressing some concern that way. I haven't heard as much from, I've had former, students who have reached out and told me that they've read the books, but I haven't had any students contact me directly. I know with the resemblance, just in some of the Goodreads reviews, there was a feeling that I, as the author, did not like Greek life, when it's really Marlette as the narrator who has the bias against, so there's some conflation of the author with your first person narrator. But that was nothing, no one, contacted me directly to say that. That was more stuff that was said online. So
Today came a really interesting example, I think, of the kind of thing that, not college, but lower level. There's some woman in Texas who came from Publishers Weekly today, which is a magazine online and in print for people in the publishing world. And the headline was that she blames scholastic school book fairs for her addiction to pornography. I know, that was the headline. I thought, seriously, this is taking a lack of personal responsibility to a whole new level, but it gets better. So then I then clicked on it because I thought, seriously, and she then claims that because when she was 11 and she read a book where there was a first kiss, that she then became addicted to kisses, whatever it is, and went on and on. And so she wants her school district somewhere in, rural Texas, or wherever, to ban scholastic book fairs. And I thought, that is so flimsy. How's that even possible? Well, then somebody else wrote to me and said she's a Christian bookseller, book publisher. And what she really wants to do is have the scholastic book fairs banned so she can have her own book fairs. And I thought, oh my God, this is just like, you don't expect this sort of thing when it comes to education, is people manipulating for their own economic or whatever advantage. And, if everybody who read A Kiss in a Book suddenly became addicted to pornography, and, the argument was we have to save our children by having, no love, no intimacy, no affection, no kiss, because somebody might get addicted to it. And I thought, where are we? If this is the world we're currently in, where this woman actually has a platform.
Yeah. Well, and how sad that a kiss, which is something that is so natural, so normal, part of a, healthy relationship. And what we want from books is to represent parts of our lives. And so to take even to take out that, how much of our real experiences are we then omitting, and not allowing young people to read about, and then making that stigmatized and sexualized in a weird way.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think if that pitched her over into an addiction to pornography, practically anything would. So, what could be more innocuous than, well, anyway, but it's just an example of how extreme I think things are happening in the realm of education and academia. So I don't know that you could make up anything that is weirder or darker than that kind of thing. Jacob, why don't we call you up and see if there are any questions from the audience? And I will probably now be stoned by residents of small towns in Texas who think, sorry, I shouldn't be political. Are you there, Jacob? There you are.
All right. Yeah, you have a few questions, Lauren. This one's from Renee. Where does your inspiration come from? Who or what inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, I've always loved to read. So I think first and foremost, just being a big reader made me want to write. I wrote my first story, at least the first story I remember, in third grade. It was called The Specialist Key. It's before I learned superlatives. So I meant the most special key, but I, didn't know what that was. And that was I think I read a lot of the Narnia books. And so it was this key that opened doors to other worlds. And ever since then, I think I had a lot of great teachers that encouraged me. My mom was a teacher. She was an elementary school teacher. And so she really valued reading and then encouraged me in everything that I did, but also was my first reader when I wrote. And so I had a lot of inspiration. But ultimately, I think being a reader was the biggest inspiration for wanting to write.
Let's see. Do you, okay, hold on. Okay, do your characters speak to you? What type of relationship do you have with your characters?
Yeah, I think being a writer allows you to hear voices in a somewhat normal way, or at least we normalize it through writing them down. But yeah, I remember very vividly when I first heard Marlette's voice. I was at my parents' house, so it must have been around the holidays, in their basement of their old house. And I heard this woman's voice. So in her first person narration, she had woken up on fire and was screaming in a language she didn't understand. And so that made it into the resemblance. And then that voice, so the way that she expressed herself, became the voice, the first person narration of that novel.
Wow, that is very vivid. Has that happened to you again?
I remember writing the prologue of The Professor, which is in Verena, who is the professor's voice, having a similar experience with that, just writing it in one go and then knowing, okay, this is the voice that now her sections will be told in the novel.
I think studying language makes it easier for you to do that. I mean, since you've obviously, spent a lot of your life learning other languages, is this kind of a variation on that?
I've never thought about that connection, but maybe. Yeah, it might. I mean, certainly I chose these protagonists who speak this language, whether they know it well or not. So I don't know. I'll have to investigate that, but maybe that might have something to do with it.
All right. We have a question asking if you're personal friends with Karen Slaughter. Do you know her?
Oh, I wish. I've seen her talk at, Thriller Fest and different places, and she is the most quick-witted, funny human. So So if anyone knows her and wants to set us up, she did blurb the professor, which was just a huge, huge highlight. And she's an Atlanta-based author. So if anyone wants to get me in touch with Karen Slaughter so we can be best friends.
Fortunately for you, Karen and I have been together since before she was a published author.
Oh, please introduce us. Please have us together at the bookstore. That would be amazing.
Now, I'll tell you what, she will be around again in August, and I will let you know. And you are welcome to motor on out here and join us.
I would love
She's
that.
actually just as fabulous in person as she is, and where you're in Canada. She's one of the she's one of the funniest persons I know naturally. And she can really just drill things too. I mean, she, as you say, she's like a rapier.
Yes, and so quick, so fast.
Right. No, I'll be happy to do that. I'm sure that'd be fun. We also raise money for the newborn kitten organization when she comes out here, because as you know, kittens are her passion. And I'll send you a very funny photo of her when she was here in August.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, love to do that. Right. Jacob, anything else?
That's it.
That's it. Well, what a pleasure it's been to talk to you again, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us and signing the professor. And it was really a treat to meet Lauren last year. One of the things 34 years into doing all this, that is probably the highlights of every year, is meeting new authors. I mean, I love spending time with authors that we know and old friends and talking about their works, but it's just wonderful to get to meet new authors, hear new voices, and then see what happens to them. Not every author actually ever writes a second book, which is the same thing. I just sort of assumed that if a person wrote a book and got it published, that magically they would write more books, but that's not true. Some people have like one book in them. And that's it. So I'm really pleased to see that, you've done a second book, you're hard at work, and a third book, and you aren't just going to vanish.
Yeah, I hope to continue doing this as long as I can.
Yeah, I think you made such a success out of it. You surely will. So thank you very much. Today is the last day of November. How can tomorrow be December 1st? There is a mystery to really speculate for all of us, but we're heading into the holidays, and let me wish everyone, if we don't see you again, a very happy December and holiday experience. And don't forget that you can buy an autographed copy of The Professor. Yay. Right.